In the previous video, we wrote the first draft of the poem. The first draft serves as the down draft, as in, we were trying to get it down. In a second draft, we're trying to get it right. By right, I mean we want to ensure the poem communicates what we want to communicate. We're trying to verify. Everything sounds right and reads as we want to, the imagery works or feels coherent, and the lines flow together. Let's begin that process. First, I recommend reading the entire poem out loud. This allows us to hear everything and hear what works, and more importantly, what does not. A young pair breeze by me in the subway hall toward a wall they decide to stop at. Already, I hear the first stanza and realize it sounds weird. It sounds too jumbled. Same with the second stanza. A lot of new poets believe the line's end is the sound's end. That's not the case. When we read poetry, we read it normally. Punctuation still applies as normal. That's why I think that first stanza feels weird. The trick with revising our poem is we can focus on the grammar, but we will come to points where we need to rewrite things entirely because the imagery simply does not communicate. It doesn't work. Or the lines do not flow or answer each other well. I know what I see in this first stanza, what I'm trying to communicate. A young couple running and stopping at random places just because. But I do not feel the stanza works that way, or that people will visualize it as I intended. I might revise young pair to young couple to communicate that clearly, that these people feel in love. I may even change it to young lovers. Young lovers breeze by me in the subway hall. To communicate the just because, I need to try bluntness. They run. They stop at a wall because that's where they felt like stopping. Or I get rid of the just because reason and say they run until they stop to catch their breath and hold each other. Maybe instead of catch their breath, I write stop to breathe. Simpler, but I also like breathe. I like the sound of breathe. Sometimes revising comes down to intuition, what sounds right. They run until they stop somewhere out of sight to hold each other and breathe. My first stanza now becomes, young lovers breeze by me in the subway hall. They run until they stop somewhere out of sight to hold each other and breathe. Now I have to ensure this connects to the second stanza and ultimately connects to the ending. The first stanza helps the reader connect to what the poetic voice sees. We point out something to the reader. See them running and doing this. In the second stanza, I'm bringing a little more of the old man voice and using repetition, questions, and cadence, language that sounds conversational. I want the reader to not just see what happened. The voice wants to remind the reader what it felt like to find hope and love, even when everything surrounding them feels harsh. Remember that. Still works for me, but maybe I lean a bit more into the repetition. Remember how harsh green lights and concrete felt? I want to contrast how the harshness feels for someone older versus younger. Might write, one day we surrendered and accepted this ambience. Or we surrendered to the ambience of harshness. Then I can contrast with, but once we ran forward. We young lovers. I use the dash as an aside to clarify we as in when we were young lovers. I like the what we held in our hands line. I like the imagery of holding hands while running, but I might revise this as we held our hands and ran. Like I said, sometimes when revising, try bluntness. Will it sound okay having ran twice? Let me try and sound out the new stanza. Remember that? Remember how harsh green lights and concrete felt? We surrendered to the ambience of harshness, but once we ran forward like them. We, young lovers, we held our hands and ran. For the revision of the final verse, I might play with how I use ran because it becomes repetitive. I want to convey, however, the adrenaline of running, the heart beating fast, and how holding hands allows us to feel this rush because we can feel our hearts beating. So I may use rushed or raced instead of ran. I may also rewrite that first line and break up the sentence shared by the two stanzas. As I'm sounding out what I write, the short sentences sound restless, like being young or running. I'm revising some lines to focus on where and how unimportant where feels when finding love or moving on a forward trajectory. Now my final stanza reads like this. Our heartbeats raced from our chest into our hands. We felt each beat in what we held. We only stopped wherever we wanted so we could breathe together in the ordinary world. Altogether, this is my new draft. Young lovers breeze by me in the subway hall. They run until they stop somewhere out of sight to hold each other and breathe. Remember that? Remember how harsh green lights and concrete felt? We surrendered to the ambience of harshness, but once we ran forward like them, we young lovers. We held our hands and ran. Our heartbeats raced from our chest into our hands. We felt each beat in what we held. We only stopped wherever we wanted so we could breathe together in the ordinary world. Does it sound better than the first draft? I argue yes. It's certainly more blunt than before, but the imagery reads more clearly. Writing drafts means trying to ensure image clarity, then playing with how to describe it in connection to feeling and the rhythm. Sometimes we need to try with more blunt, plain language before we solve how it sounds in a final form. To rap, many will ask, when is a poem done? The answer, when we say so, or when it is published.